Hello, everyone. I hope that you can all hear me. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by the AMS Board, the Board on Representation, Accessibility, Inclusion, and Diversity, and co-hosted by the Board on Early Career Professionals. My name is Aaron Pina, and I am the chair of AMS Board. This is the third webinar that's been organized by the Accessibility Committee under BRAID. Our first one we had last summer. It was on vision impairment. Then we had one in the fall on cognitive and learning disabilities. And today's topic we'll be talking, the topic is I'm an atmospheric scientist who copes with a mental illness. And so today we're going to be hearing about perspectives from folks from various career sectors. I do want to offer a content warning. There will be topics on anxiety, depression, and suicide today. If anybody has any questions on what AMS is doing regarding accessibility, regarding physical disabilities, mental health, etc., or if you have suggestions on what we can do better, or if you want to join our efforts, please reach out to me and the BRAID Accessibility Committee. I'll put my email in the chat, but it's Pina, P-I-N-A.Aaron, A-A-R-O-N @gmail.com. So today's moderator for the panel is Mike Farrar. I'm Mike Farrar, who is our AMS president. So I want to thank Mike also for his willingness and leadership and for being with us today and really championing and prioritizing this topic. So thanks, Mike, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Aaron. I'm really excited about today's panel and really thrilled to be able to moderate it today. We're going to talk about some subjects today that I think many of us may have encountered oftentimes through friends or family. And Aaron kind of gave you some of the range of issues that we were talking about, some of which could be long-term, others that could be caused by post-traumatic stress, and others. But the difference today is not only are we going to talk about those issues, but we're going to talk about how it fits in with our profession and how it impacts your peers, your coworkers, and frankly, your friends and colleagues that you work with, and how they cope and adapt to be able to pursue their careers and do their jobs, and how they interact with their other colleagues, and the difference that you can make to them and for the whole workforce. So I'm just very thrilled for this panel. We got a great diversity, as you can see, but there's diversities of ages, disciplines, experiences. But the one thing you're not going to see a diversity of is engagement and excitement. All four of these panelists are fantastic. Our dry run was something that was probably the best hour and a half I've had in a long time. And so you're not going to get that, unfortunately, because it was just great. It was really, really short. The five of us, it was just fabulous. But you're going to get to hear what these folks have to say about their experiences. And frankly, you're here to listen to them and not to me. So we're going to go through this. We're going to go through one at a time. You're going to hear each of their stories. And then we'll open it up at the end to Q&A. So with the Q&A, I'll be asking the first question. That'll give you all who are joining us today an opportunity to put your questions in the chat, and that that Aaron, who you saw at the introduction, our leader of BRAID, will be able to help me in picking out some of the questions that we can answer at the end. But we are going to capture those questions, and our panelists, so hopefully will be able to help answer those perhaps afterwards in writing if we're able to do so. So with that, you're going to hear four incredibly engaging stories of their profession and their life, and just anyway, hope you enjoyed it as much as I know I'm going to. So with that, we're going to start one at a time. So the three panels can drop off, and we're going to focus on Justin now. We're going to start with Justin. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Come back, Ken. I forgot. I'm going to do the intro round first, and then we're going to go one at a time. My bad.
Just kidding.
That are going to present is Justin Pullen. He's a National Weather Service forecaster from the Seattle WFO. Secondly, we're going to hear from Crystal Worley, who is a former Weather Service WFO person with Cheyenne, but now she's working for the AmeriCorps and their COVID Containment Response Corps, which is, interesting in and of itself. Next, we're going to listen to Ariana Castillo. She's a student, a PhD student at Harvard and a former NASA intern at NASA Langley Research Center in Virginia. And then we're going to cap it off with Ken Barlow, who is the lead meteorologist, chief meteorologist for KSTP and Minneapolis-St. Paul. So with that, now I was ahead of myself, and now we're all going to drop off, and you're going to get to hear Justin talk. So go take it from here, Justin.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And thank you for being here today, everyone. Happy to be here to share my story and answer your questions. My story revolves around what I would like to call my career event so far. This occurred while I was at the Tallahassee Weather Forecast Office, and it was Hurricane Michael back in October 2018. If you are in the weather service, or if you work in the private sector or even broadcast to a degree, you know that working something like a hurricane event is very much a team effort. My case was very unique in the fact that I was actually deployed to the Bay County Emergency Operations Center, which turned out to be ground zero for the landfall. So while I had worked hurricane events before in the weather service, I had not been removed from my teammates in many perspectives. That said, working the lead up to the event, there was that link back to the office in a virtual setting. So there was very much a lot of teamwork going on, which was great. But as expected, when the hurricane started to make landfall, that link was broken as communications went down, and I was very much on my own. That said, if you're familiar with Hurricane Michael, it was a Category 5 hurricane at landfall, and it devastated portions of the Florida Panhandle coast, which means that I was very much stuck in Bay County away from everyone else that I worked with for the better part of 5 days. And in those 5 days, fortunately, the weather post-hurricane was pretty decent. So my services were not very much needed as far as briefings and whatnot went. So that allowed me to get out and help the office to get a jump start on some of the survey work. And if you've ever been in an area post-disaster, it can be a lot to take in, and it was a lot to process. And a lot of these things, whenever I finally made it back to Tallahassee, several days later, were things that my teammates hadn't seen quite yet. Unfortunately, all of us, we were tasked with going out and seeing and having to survey varying degrees of damage. So each of my teammates have different stories, but in a lot of ways, whenever I got back, I felt like since all of them, for the most part, went through that experience together, that they wouldn't necessarily understand kind of what I went through, nor did I expect them to. And in a lot of ways, just kind of knowing that everyone handles these sorts of things very differently, I didn't want to burden someone else with kind of my issues. So from what I expected in the post-event side of this, which is where, my experience really took a turn for the unexpected, I very much expected to be very physically tired, which I was. And probably just mentally needing to check out for maybe a day or two. But I didn't expect this to linger on for, 2 to 3 weeks, where the recovery process was, riddled with potholes like anxiety and just overall being mentally drained. Going into it, I didn't really understand kind of what was going on with me, why I was feeling so irritable, why I was tired, why I had this anxiety about, going in and kind of facing what questions we're going to get about the hurricane today at work, and what am I going to see whenever I go out on this survey. So a lot of my experience looking back on it now was just amplified by not knowing what to expect. And even to some degree, things that were going on in my personal life that I wasn't necessarily expecting the other shoe to drop on. As they say, bad things come in threes, right? So, when you're already kind of down and dealing with something big, having extra things on top of that to deal with is very much not ideal. So, for me, personally, it took me actually having to be removed from that environment. I had a temporary work assignment in Fort Worth at a regional headquarters that allowed me to kind of get away and really process things without being in the thick of it and dealing with it every day. That really helped me out. But sometimes I wonder how different my story would be had I not had that opportunity to be removed from that. So for me, it took way longer to really work through the post-event stress than I would have imagined. And as someone who's now a leader, that is something that is very much in the back of my mind. And I feel like it's really kind of better prepared me from a leadership perspective to better help others that go through traumatic events like I have.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing that. I mean, this really gets into understanding that even when you don't go into a situation with any kind of mental health concerns, that stress in a traumatic event can really have real consequences. And I would really laud your courage to come and talk about that publicly. And so we're going to transition from Justin to Crystal Worley. And as a reminder, Crystal started with a similar background as a WFO weather forecaster in Cheyenne, and ended up leaving, and she'll tell you a bit about that story, and now she works for AmeriCorps. And so Crystal, please, we'd love to hear your story now.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here and listening to all of our stories today. My story does revolve around my time at the National Weather Service. So 2 years ago, I left grad school, finished my degree, and moved to Cheyenne, all the way across the country from my family. And that's when things really started to head into a quick downward spiral. When I first started my career in the weather service, unfortunately, I've had anxiety most of my life, but this was the first time I really had any sort of experience with depression. And it was scary. And it was easy to feel shame towards myself as well, because I just started a new job and I wanted to do well, and I wanted to impress my new coworkers and do a good job. And I was really struggling, and I was afraid to admit that. The anxiety was overwhelming. Like many of my colleagues will tell you today, mental illness is physically debilitating. And for example, my chest would hurt so much that it felt like it was going to cave in. And sometimes the thoughts in my head were so fast and so loud that hours would go by where I would stare at a screen and do nothing, and I didn't realize it because I was just so anxious. I've had panic attacks in the bathroom at work before returning to my shift, like nothing happened. And sometimes I just had to leave for the day because I couldn't get it under control. And I didn't know how to tell my coworkers at the time what was going on. Again, I felt a lot of shame. And so I just said, yeah, I'm sick. I need to go, which is what it is. Mental illness is an illness. But I didn't have the heart to say, like, I can't get my anxiety under control. And when I went home, it didn't get better. I lived by myself. I was isolated, and depression is really good at making you feel like you're totally alone. and nobody else feels the way that you do. And that combination of not really having a support system, being far away from home, out of my comfort zone, new job, new everything, as you can imagine, the depression really took off. And that was the first time that I experienced suicidal thoughts. I missed a lot of work in the beginning, and I started seeing a psychiatrist and a therapist who were able to help me a lot. But as those of us in shift work know, shift work is really rough on the body and on the mind. And the stability that I got from seeing a doctor only lasted for so long, and I continued to get worse, unfortunately. The anxiety was pretty much unbearable, and I started doing overnight shifts, and those hit me really hard. I tried to make the best of them. I tried to eat better. I tried to exercise and make time to talk to people. I was still having panic attacks before my midnight shifts, and it was awful. And I would compare myself to my coworkers, and I would get so angry at myself. I would say, look at your coworkers, look at them doing this. You're not strong enough. You are so weak. And it was this constant just self-hate in my head, which didn't help at all. And that continued. And it just got worse and worse until finally I became suicidal and was hospitalized. It's been almost a year now since I was put in an inpatient mental health facility for a few days. I was saying some scary things before I was put in because basically I had accepted that, or I had told myself that it was never going to get better, and that the only way for it to get better was for me to not be around anymore. And it's hard to say even now, and it's really hard to think about how much pain I was in and what I've gone through the past couple years. But honestly, that hospital stay was a wake-up call. It was my brain telling me, hey, you can't do this anymore. Like, you can't keep going on this way. Something has to change. And I made the decision that, okay, I probably need to leave. I gave it one more shot. I came back to work after being in the hospital. Wasn't getting better. Most of my shifts were work from home, and I was still having panic attacks. And I couldn't do my job. And that was really important to me, to be able to do my job and do it well. The Weather Service has an important mission, and I felt like I wasn't meeting that mission, and that I wasn't able to, and my mental illness was holding me back. And I knew it was best to leave. And it took me a while, even after the hospital stay, to finally just resign. Part of that was because I felt like a failure. I felt like if I left this job, even though it was just one job in meteorology and there are many different types, I felt like that was it. I had thrown my degrees away, that I had, wasted my life if I left. And it made it hard to convince myself that I needed to leave, because I was saying the other option is that I wasn't good enough and that I had failed. And despite all that, despite all those thoughts, I still left because I needed to. And those thoughts didn't stop after I left. And they became worse, actually, because I lost some friends as a result of the decision that I made. People thought that I was just trying to abuse the system, that I was making it up. And that made me feel even worse. People that I thought cared about me and understood what I was going through. And that's all part of what we go through with a mental illness too. People don't understand, really. It's not something visible. It's not something physically tangible. And I think people struggle with it, and then they make their own assumptions and think that they know what's actually going on in the situation, even though we're telling them what's going on. I'm suffering, I'm hurting, I have severe anxiety, I can't get myself to do anything, I can't get myself to take care of myself. So that's really hard, and talking about it helps a lot. And what my colleagues and I are doing today helps so much to show people the different ways that mental illness can look, and then how we can help our friends, families, colleagues who are coping with a mental illness get through it. I did slowly start to feel better after I left the Weather Service, thankfully. I feel much better today compared to when I left, but it's still really hard and really sad to be separated from that now. But it is what I needed to do, and I continued when I can to see a therapist. Highly recommend that for everyone to seek therapy. It's so helpful. And as cliche as it sounds, you're not alone. Again, depression's really, really good at convincing you that you are totally alone, but you're not. And I'm thankful for the friends and family that I had through it all and that I continue to have on my worst days. And I'm glad to be able to be here today to tell you about what I've gone through. And I'm glad you'll be able to hear my colleagues as well talk about their experiences, so we can normalize mental illness and help others through this.
Oh, thank you so much, Crystal. I know that wasn't easy, but thank you so much for sharing that. We'll get to more at the Q&A at the end. I'm really very moving and very inspiring to how you've overcome and have moved on to another part of your career and doing very well. I'd like to now transition to Ariana Castillo. As a reminder, Ariana is currently a PhD student at Harvard, but prior to that, she was working as a NASA Langley Research Center as an intern. So she has got some varied background. Apart from the first two that started with the National Weather Service, this is in a different area, but in our field. So Ariana, please, we'd love to hear your background and story too.
Howdy. Again, my name is Ariana Castillo. My pronouns are she, her. I guess my background is a bit more academia, research. I got my meteorology degree at Texas A&M University in 2019, whoop. And I am now at Harvard pursuing a PhD in Earth and Planetary Sciences. Oh boy, where do I start? So I've always struggled with mental health throughout my life. For example, anxiety and depression. However, I was able to cope with these things throughout my childhood and early on throughout undergrad. And going into undergrad, I was paying for school by myself, and I had this pressure to do well. Coming from a Latinx background, I just had this drive within me to be successful, and I felt this need to prove myself, to show that I belong in atmospheric science. And all the while I was studying, and it's just academia as a whole. A lot of people valued studying over taking care of themselves, like, oh, I stayed up until 4 a.m. last night studying for this or doing this homework assignment. And I kind of fed into that and cared more about my success over my well-being. It came to a point to where I was working a part-time job to pay for school, going to school full-time, and also doing undergraduate research. And I just didn't have time for myself. And it came to a point to where I couldn't cope with my anxiety and depression anymore, and these symptoms became very apparent and very visible. So I guess this was around my junior year. I was doing relatively well in school. Things looked okay on the outside. I've always been that person who just smiles all the time. However, deep down inside, I was suffering. I don't really know how to put it into words. But it came to a point to where I just needed to get help. And I'll get more into this later. So I got put on medication. I got diagnosed with severe depression, anxiety, panic, and bipolar disorders. It was a handful. I didn't know how to, process all of it. And so the thing about mental illness is that medications are extremely tricky. The things I was put on while I was in school and trying to manage everything in my life, they'd either work for a bit and stop working, or they'd make my situation worse. It was just very discouraging. And so depression lies. It's very deceitful. It's very sneaky. And I just felt so alone. I felt like I was in the dark. And mental illness and mental health, there's just so much stigma around it. And I just didn't know what to do. And I know people have been talking about this, but people don't realize that mental illness is physically debilitating. You know, I have invisible disabilities. It's more than just how I'm feeling or what my thoughts are. There are just days where I couldn't move. And so I'd have panic attacks in the middle of class where I just had to step out, but I couldn't afford to miss class or else it would make my anxiety worse, and I'd show up to class sobbing at some points. And I did what I had to do. And I just kept on spiraling and spiraling, and it came to a point where medication just wasn't helping at all. And my dream of becoming an atmospheric scientist was tormenting me, basically. And I had an attempt on my life, and that's when I was hospitalized for about a week, and I finally pursued therapy. And there's a lot of stigma behind that. Growing up in a Latinx environment, that's my identity. I tend to compartmentalize, and mental health is kind of a taboo topic. And so that's when I realized this environment I'm in right now is killing me. I need to get help, and I need to take a break. However, there's part of me that felt like I was a failure for doing that. And I was also paying for school, so like I would be wasting a whole bunch of money by withdrawing. When I went back to school for a couple of weeks, I didn't realize how difficult it would be. People who weren't even my professors were asking about me, and it just felt it was just difficult to, I guess, deal with. And I was just failing all of my classes, so I finally took that leap, and I was like, okay, I need to prioritize myself, and my mental health and well-being are paramount. So I withdrew and pursued treatment for the rest of that semester, which was a privilege. I had the privilege of having some resources to help me do that. But going back that next semester for the first time, I truly realized how much ableism the institutions are built on. I was accused of being irresponsible and lazy when I was in treatment. I've had mentors tell me not to mention my struggles with mental health and my disabilities in applications. I've been told, I should reconsider doing internships because of my mental health. I should wait to go to graduate school because of my mental health. And it was just difficult because there are a lot of people who've seen other people's experiences, and they thought they could insert themselves into mine and write a chapter of my story when they've only gotten a small glimpse of it when I'm telling them, hey, I can do this. And so this prompted my advocacy on Twitter. I realized I had to advocate for myself because no one else was doing this for me. And I was tired of feeling alone. I wanted to find a community of people. And also I wanted people to know that they aren't alone, and that, we're all in this together. And so that's when I started talking about my experiences on Twitter with my illnesses and my disabilities. And that's where I found a beautiful community of a whole bunch of awesome humans. And yeah, I went out into the internships anyways. I'm in graduate school. And I think if anything, to get out of my story, I would just want y'all to know that disabilities aren't liabilities. They're parts of us that allow us to thrive in our own way. And I've had to learn a lot. I've had to learn to not compare myself to other colleagues. I've had to learn that I have my own way of doing things, and that's okay. Baby steps are okay. Prioritizing my mental health is okay. Getting rest is okay. And so if anything, I'd also like to say, like, to allies and people who are advocates for mental health, to please just listen to our community, listen to our individual experiences, but also don't speak over us and for us. I think that's just a huge thing. And so I thank you all for listening to my story today. This is really difficult to talk about, but yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Ariana. It was obviously very difficult, but it was very enlightening, and it was really interesting hearing some of the common threads from Justin and Crystal. But of course, just like individual people, there are individuals. Your experiences are all a little different as well. So thank you again for sharing. I know that was hard. We're going to transition to our last speaker. The first three were early career. And so we're getting someone in mid late career. And so this is a demonstration that this is not just something that you have to deal with when you're younger and it goes away. There are people all throughout the career spectrum who are dealing with these. And I'm just really grateful that Ken, the chief meteorologist for KSTP in Minneapolis and St. Paul, is here to talk to us about his story.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for helping us out here today. Hi, everybody. My name is Ken, and I am the newly minted chief meteorologist at KSTP. I'm going to take you back to when this all began. It was also in college. I was a junior. You ready for this? It was 1983, and I was feeling really up and anxious. I wasn't diagnosed with anything. I just thought that's the way I was. But it got to be a week or two when I wasn't sleeping and not eating right. And my girlfriend, who's now my wife of 36 years, said, you should probably go to the doctor. So I did. They did a brain scan, and it came back fine. There was nothing wrong. So I thought, okay, it's my imagination. Fast forward 15 years of living. We now have 3 kids. Our third one had just arrived. And I opened my eyes one day in our bedroom while I was here in the Twin Cities working at Care TV. I was the chief meteorologist there. This was 1998. And I looked at the ceiling and I thought, I can't get out of bed. I could not move. Like Ariana and Crystal said, that it was depression, but I didn't know it. But it's paralyzing. It can be paralyzing depending on who you are. I couldn't get up. Well, this went on for 3 or 4 days where I dragged myself out of bed. I went to work. I smiled in front of the TV, went in the weather office and put my head down and just wanted to die because I had no feeling. I didn't care. I didn't want to be there. And I felt very sad. So this went on for 3 or 4 days or whatever. And I went to my doctor, again, my family practitioner, not a therapist or psychologist or psychiatrist, because I didn't know that it was anything to do with my head. And I said, this is how I'm feeling. He did a bunch of tests and said I had a grass allergy for August. And that's why I was feeling so down. So he gave me an inhaler and sent me home. So I just said, okay, somehow I got out of that. And then I left Care 11 in the Twin Cities to go to WBZ, where I was a chief meteorologist for 4 years, back in 2006 through 11. And while I was there, or 10, while I was there, Teresa, my wife and kids were out here in the Twin Cities. The kids had to continue school. So I was flying back and forth every weekend. And the more I did, the better I felt. I wasn't eating. This was like that college feeling I had. I wasn't eating. I didn't have to try hard. I felt like I was king of the world. I could do anything. I didn't even need to sleep. I could run at 3 in the morning on a treadmill that I bought. I never had a treadmill. So I was doing all that. I lost a lot of weight. And the next time I came home, Teresa, my wife, said, promise me when you get back, you'll see a doctor. So I did. I actually went to a neurologist because that's how concerned we were that it was something in my head again. She put me in the scan, the MRI, and called me a few days later with the results and said, well, I think you have vertigo, which I wasn't sure what it was, except it was an old Alfred Hitchcock movie. That's the only thing I knew about vertigo. But I was like, well, it's not that kind of dizzy. I just feel dizzy in my head. Everything just seems to be spinning and going around, but not in a physical sense. The gears were just moving really fast. But anyway, I took the pill she gave me and went home, and a month later I collapsed. I woke up and I was in the hospital in Massachusetts. in the mental ward because they told me right then that I had bipolar disorder. And I was so mad that I was reluctant, to say the least. I told them I wasn't going to take the medication they were trying to give me, even though my wife was there now telling me, please take your medication. So I stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks until I took my medicine. And then I got home and immediately Googled famous people with bipolar disorder because that's what I was diagnosed with. And Ben Stiller came up, Winston Churchill, they don't know, and Britney Spears came up. So I said, well, okay, well, at least I know people can be successful with this. But then I found out my dad had it when he was alive. He had died in 2005, 2 years before I was diagnosed. And he didn't want any of his 5 boys to know. He had 5 sons, and none of us knew. He told my mother to promise him not to tell us unless it was urgent someday, and this was pretty urgent, so she told me. Then I took on my dad's shame, and from 2007 to 2012, I didn't tell anybody outside my family. And then in 2012, I was back here in the Twin Cities now, working. I called NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and asked if I could do anything for them. I can talk on the stage, I can speak, I can do stuff. And they said, would you like to host our big walk that we have? The Stigma Walk, the annual walk. And I said, sure. And I went there, and it was like they were speaking to me. There were 6,000 people there holding signs, stop the stigma, depression's real, it's not in your head. It was like they were talking to me, and all of a sudden I just blurted out to the crowd that I had bipolar disorder. And everybody cheered, which was shocking, but welcome. Because then I thought, first of all, Teresa's gonna kill me because we've kept this hidden for so long. Nextly, I'll get fired. I didn't get fired. Teresa was mad, but she felt better after. And my boss just told me that I had to be who I was. So I went out and started talking about it, going on TV talking about it, going to churches, going to groups, wherever, thousands of people over the past 9 years or whatever it's been, 8 years, talking to people. And that's why I came forward with this story, because I want you to know that even though we take medication to feel better, so do people with high blood pressure. If you're diagnosed with cancer, terrible, but it can be treated. A lot of it can be, not all of it, but you know, you have chemo, you have your medicine, you do all that and you'll be okay. You have heart disease, you get a stent put in, you go on. With a mental illness, it's the same thing. I was diagnosed at 45 years old. That was back in 2007. So I'm 58 years old, and I was 45 when I was diagnosed. But I knew back in college that something was wrong. So my word to you today is to, A, you're not alone, just like you've heard already from Crystal and Ariana. You're not alone. Depression makes you feel like you are. Get help because it works. And please take your drugs because they work. And I want people to normalize this, like everybody said this morning, that we're not all crazy murderers. We're not all crazy. I hate that word. We just have something that goes on chemically in our brain that we can't help. So we treat it, and usually we come out okay. That's it, Mike. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ken. Really appreciate it. That's an amazing career path and story, and just the fact that it took so long to figure it out. It's I don't know how you I'm sure looking back, it's wondering how did I make it through all those years not knowing what was going on.
That's exactly what I do. Yep.
So I'm going to ask all the other panelists to come back on now. We're going to do the panel discussion now. And those of you who have joined us today would encourage you to put your questions in the chat, and Erin Pena is going to help us go through them. So while you're doing that, I have the honor of asking the first question. So we've heard a lot of common threads in terms of the stigma issue, the feelings towards yourself, feelings of aloneness. There's lots of common threads, but the one thing that I'd like you all to talk about is there's common threads for your individual cases, but one common thread is that you all have jobs and you have coworkers and colleagues that you're working with, and presumably you all have a boss. And so we're all accountable to a supervisor. So I think one good question that would love to hear from you and those of us who are allies and who are coworkers ourselves, what do we do? And so I'd like to ask y'all, what can your coworkers and even and sometimes specifically your supervisor, because they do have a bit of a different role, how can they help? And we already had a hint, I believe, from Crystal and said what not, or maybe it was Ariana said what not to do. But what can we do to help? So we're going to go in reverse order. So we're going to start with Ken, and we'll work our way backwards to Justin. Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, I would say don't ignore it. I would say if you see something, say something. If you feel like your friend at work, don't try to come up with solutions because we don't want to hear those. But please don't ignore a symptom if you see it, because sometimes we don't realize it. We know inside how it feels, but we don't know outwardly if it's being conveyed that way. Or do I ask my wife sometimes when I'm depressed but I have to go to work, do I look tired today? Do I look bad today? Do I need more cover stick today? So she gets it, but people at work now get it too. I made it welcoming to them, saying, please tell me if you guys think you hear something odd, or if I sound tired, or look sluggish, or look sad. Please just say, are you okay?
Okay. Ariana, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah. Oh boy. I mean, I think I already said this earlier, but please just listen, like genuinely listen to our struggles, and don't, kind of like what Ken said, don't offer solutions like, oh, here's resources. Like, I already know about the resources. I just, can you please validate me and, like, see where I'm coming from? I think that's just a huge one. And also just like, I know we all have experience with, loved ones or colleagues or other people around us struggling with mental health too. Based on those experiences you have with other people, don't use those experiences to handle other people's situations, because we're all unique. We all have our own unique and valid experiences. And so I think that's something I just really wanted to get across. And, don't judge a book by its cover. There's usually so much more to someone's story. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say. I could write a book about it, but
Well, we'd like to read it, but well, thanks for that. I think that's maybe the one thing you said about don't use your prior experiences to try to work your problem. That may be something that's going to be harder for us scientists to do, because we're used to extrapolating and problem solvers. So I'm betting that might even be something that us in the weather world might do worse at than the general public. So that's a good point. So Crystal, what are your thoughts on this?
I would say seek knowledge on mental illness. It's okay if you don't understand, if you don't know much about it. Being on this webinar is a good step, and learning more about it. Just Google it too. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, like Ken mentioned, NAMI, is a fantastic organization, and they have so many resources for what is depression, what is bipolar disorder, what's a personality disorder. And I think they even offer their own types of webinars for you to learn more. Volunteer with NAMI, do all sorts of stuff to help you learn more. That's probably one of the best things that you can do for those people that you care about, is to learn more so you can understand, not really understand, but get an idea of what they're experiencing and what it's like. And like Ariana said, like, don't use your own experiences to try to help, and don't say I understand, because you really don't. Each person is different. Each person's experience is different, and we may be able to relate to each other on some level, but what we're all experiencing is different. And make sure to learn that too, and remember that when you're interacting with the people you care about who are coping with a mental illness.
As a practical point, the I understand part is something that people will often want to say to let you know that they're hearing you. What's a better word to use then? What's a better way to, the message you're trying to say is I understand doesn't mean I know what you're feeling, because obviously I can't. But if I'm trying to send the message that I'm hearing you and I want to help, what's a better word than understand? I'm just kind of curious.
You just said it. You just said it, actually, is I'm hearing you.
Okay, right.
I hear you. and acknowledging as well, like validating a person's feelings. That does sound challenging. That sounds so hard. Saying things like that, and not offering those like sympathetic responses, but more being empathetic. A lot of times when I've come to people with my experiences, they like to just say, well, it's okay, it'll be okay. And that's just like erasing someone's feelings.
Right.
You're telling me I can't feel what I'm feeling, so validate them, say that you hear them, and encourage them to speak.
All right. So I think a good way to remember empathy, not sympathy, is one
Yes.
of the things I heard you say. Okay. Well,
There's a
Justin, what are your thoughts?
For me, and being so far removed from an office that works tropical weather, and seeing the 2020 season from afar, it really kind of put a lot of things in perspective for me. So just knowing what the symptoms look like. One thing that my boss at the time did before we even went through everything with Hurricane Michael was, for those of you that don't know, he worked Hurricane Harvey, and he was at the landfalling WFO for that. So, in a lot of ways, we don't want to use our experiences to try to validate someone else's experiences. But in his case, he used his experience to say that I went through these things. If you experience these things, it's normal, it's okay. So a lot of the things that he brought to the forefront about what he experienced from that were things that I experienced. And while I didn't recognize it immediately, I started to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together after the fact. And I was like, okay, this is what he was talking about. So if you're an ally, just understanding what, post-traumatic stress looks like, and checking in, that's a big one. Checking in with your team afterwards is a big thing. And one thing that I've been guilty about in the past, just chatting with someone that's gone through a big event or something really traumatic, is, while listening to them after it's done, it's, oh, reach out if you need anything. That's the last thing on someone's mind whenever they go through something like that, is thinking, oh, let me reach out to someone and, talk about what's going on. And, if you're an ally, reach out and check up on people after an event. If they're not ready to talk about it, don't try to force it. They will talk about it in due time when they're ready. So definitely checking in with your people and making sure that, if they want to talk about it, be there and actually listen and validate their feelings.
Well, so one follow-up with that then, I mean, you never know whether it's a situation like the topic of today, whether it's someone who suffered a loss or any other issue. You always wonder, you don't want to say the wrong thing. So sometimes people will avoid saying anything because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, or they're afraid of looking superficial or inadvertently offending someone. So I've also heard people who are afraid to check up. It's like, oh, I'm afraid that they think I don't trust them, or I'm annoying them, or I'm badgering them. But I'm hearing the opposite from you. Just the fact that someone reaches out to say, hi, how are you doing? How's the what? Can you all talk a little bit about that? Just interact. Okay.
Yeah, be proactive, and if you see or feel a disturbance in the force, who's the Star Wars fan? Is that you, Ariana? I thought so. Me too. If you feel a disturbance in the force and you're a coworker and ally, please speak up. Say, how are you feeling? Are you okay today? You seem a little off, or whatever. There's a way that you can make it. I mean, you're a grown up, but we've told you what not to say. So if you just ask, how are you doing today? That means a world.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm sure you got a lot. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just like a simple text or email, just like, hey, checking in to see how you're doing. It really, like just a little sentence, it goes a long way.
Yeah.
All right. So Aaron, you have been behind the scenes here collating all the stuff that's been coming in. So what do you got for the panel here that for the next question discussion topic?
Yeah, this is so we're gonna have let's go to Ken with this one to start. So one of the questions is, could the speakers also point to the fact that therapy is a process and can be difficult at first?
Yes.
It doesn't mean that it's not working. So can you elaborate on that, Ken, please?
I would very much like to, because I am a case in point. I in the hospital said I didn't need a therapist. I don't need a therapist. I was working against the therapist proactively because I was angry. I was going through all the stages of grief, and the first one is anger. I lost the old Ken, and now I'm diagnosed with this thing. What the hell is that? Now I'm not me. So the first stage I have in grief is anger. So I didn't want to take my medicine. I didn't cooperate with anybody. But I started to learn, it actually felt good. But it took weeks. It took 3 or 4 sessions the first week, and then 1 week at a time after that to trust that person. That's a big thing, is trust, for me anyway. Trusting someone enough to be so vulnerable about it. But it does work.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. If anybody has anything extra, there are a number of questions, and I'd like to get to them. But if anybody has anything to add, I'd really like to allow you to speak on that and elaborate.
Yeah, I wanted to add something. I'm still seeing a therapist, and every time I go, it's like getting hit by a truck. It honestly feels that way, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure that ever goes away. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard to have to go in there and accept that you're facing the worst, what feels like the worst parts of yourself. Like your body's natural response is to avoid pain. So if you feel heat from a fire, you back up. And it's the same with dealing with feelings of depression and anxiety. You don't want to face that. And so you have to talk kindly to yourself every time, like, no, we need to do this. This is important. And for me, I think it's still difficult every time. And yeah, I think Ken can relate to that too, and the rest of us.
Thank you, Crystal. So I want to go to Crystal and Ariana. There's a question to the two of you. Your stories are really powerful. Would you mind talking about where you have found some success in terms of self-care and moving forward? Also, Ariana, as a student, how do you think, or would have liked, professors, how can they create a space to acknowledge and accommodate mental illness?
Oh boy. Actions speak louder than words. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been to, and they're like, oh, we prioritize mental health, and nothing's really done. And it's a lot of it is it's a bigger thing. It's this what the system's built on. Okay, let me just start with self-care first. I've had to shift my mindset. And it's still really difficult, and I still struggle with this. Like, just because I've gotten treatment and stuff doesn't mean I don't struggle anymore. Like, it's a daily thing. I had to change my mindset and slap that sponge of internalized ableism against the wall and just be like, I need to put myself first. Self-care looks different for everyone. I've had to be very intuitive. Like, people are like, oh, exercise, this, and this. I just listen to my body. I'm like, okay, I feel like cooking right now. I feel like drawing. And so it takes time. It took me like 6 months to figure out what I like and what I don't, and to listen to my body. So baby steps are okay. You can't figure it out overnight, and that's okay. It's a process. It's a long process. As for making spaces that are available, there's a lot I think that needs to be done system-wise, but like I think trainings for faculty and staff to handle these situations, and like how to talk to students and colleagues would be really beneficial, because people mean well, but it ends up being kind of ableist. So like, that's all I have to say. I could elaborate more on this, but we're running short on time.
Crystal, did you want to add anything to that in terms of self-care?
Yeah, kind of building on what Ariana said, it is, even with therapy and medication and doing all the things, every day is a different day. And it is a daily battle. It honestly is. And I'm not just, all of a sudden better because I see a therapist and I'm on medication. This is something that I will deal with the rest of my life. It's not going away. So I have good days, I have bad days. And I think it's been important for me to remind myself of that, because sometimes when I have a rough day, it's like, man, I'm never going to get better. It's always going to be like this. I'm always going to feel like this. And it can be hard to get out of that. And I think remembering the bad days that I've been through before, the really hard days I've been through, and the ones that I will continue to get through. And like Ariana said too, like doing what feels right to you in the moment. If you want to bake a whole chocolate cake and eat it yourself, do it. Like there's no shame in that. Do whatever you need to do to feel good. If you're feeling anxious and need to step away from work or from class, please do it. Like listen to your mind, because if you don't, it'll make you listen. It'll show you that something has to change. So listening to yourself.
Thank you. And Justin, I want to go to you. I'm going to combine two questions here. So they're about the same. So the first question is, what can be done to help employers better handle employees' mental illness? And the other, very similar to this, is a little bit more specific, is I don't believe that my supervisor is very understanding and wants me to be like someone else. How do I increase my supervisor's empathy to my mental and physical illnesses? How do I explain what imposter syndrome can do to people? So more on the employer's side, Justin.
I don't think, we're all unique individuals, right? So I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to this, unfortunately. I think things like today, where we're all sitting down and telling our stories, goes a long way. Just kind of trying to look at this from 30,000 foot level, there's really no training, I could be wrong on this, but off the top of my head, there's really no like training, or for weather service folks, no CLC module that you can go through that can prepare you for something like this, right? So sitting down and really getting to know your people, knowing their stories and understanding them goes a long way, I feel like. So if anything else, and it could be tough. I understand, I am recognizing imposter syndrome more and more, just with my peers, and seeing situations where I'm like, oh, okay, that's why they don't want to speak, or they're afraid of this and this and this, and I'm starting to really put the pieces of the puzzle together. But sitting down, I know it takes a lot of courage to really speak out about things and to sit down and have a conversation, especially if it's going to be, your higher ups, like your boss or your boss's boss or something along those lines. It takes a lot of courage to do that. But I really feel like if, the person has a lot of empathy and they really care about their people, it will go a long way toward helping the situation.
Thanks, Justin. And I do want to I know we're at the top of the hour. I do want to kind of, maybe we can close with, getting before the final words from Mike, but your stories are really touching a lot of people. This is, one of the first of its kind at this scale for the American Meteorological Society. So there's a lot of positive feedback, and you are all given representation to this hidden identity. And so I really, somebody's asking, can you recommend the first steps to start therapy? Maybe we'll start with Ken.
The first steps to start therapy is to realize, first of all, that you need it, which was, willing to say that you need help with anything, whether it's alcoholism or whatever it is the first recognition. I knew I needed therapy, but I didn't want to get it. And then I just did some research. I honestly just looked at who my provider was going to pay for, at least some. And then I went through the list of people and said, yes, no, yes, no. I don't care if it's a male or female. I just want somebody who understands. So I met with a few of them first. And if it didn't work out, I didn't make another appointment. I don't know about you guys, but that's how mine worked. And I have a guy now who I love. I had a woman at an eating disorder place that I was at a few years ago who I loved. So it depends on who you're comfortable with, but I was comfortable with anybody who would hear me.
Anybody else want to, on getting started and the first steps to seeking therapy or getting help?
I guess I can speak for like students. Check with your university and their resources. I know they're hit or miss, but like really reach out and be proactive. That's what I did, and I got one of the best therapists I've ever had, like ever through my school at A&M. And like, yeah, I would just reach out, like send an email or just check out your school's website, and usually it's free. That's what helped me, and I like made a plan with my counselor to like see them and have a schedule that was just really helpful. And just, you know, it's okay to get help. It's okay to prioritize your help. And I believe that I wasn't worthy of getting help for a long time. And so I just want to normalize that, like it's okay. It's a process. It's like ripping off a Band-Aid. It hurts, but
Anybody else?
Anybody else that'd like to tag onto that question?
Yeah, just wanted to say, like, similar to how you would seek treatment for cancer, or if you need to go to the doctor for the flu or for COVID-19, therapy is important too to help you get better. And because there's a stigma around it, it might be hard to see it that way. But when you think about it as it is an illness, what would you do for any other illness? You would seek help. And yes, admitting that it is really, really hard. But like Ken said, you get to a point where you're like, okay, I need something. I need help. It's gotten bad.
So you actually, I'm going to ask one last question for us to, before we go and conclude. And you actually have a nice segue because you're reading my mind. You mentioned COVID-19. So this is a time where all of us are isolated to one extent or another. Most of us are working from home, and there was a common thread a lot from all four of you for feeling isolated with the struggles that you were going through. Now, on top of this, we have actual physical isolation on top of it going on. So I'd like for you all just to share, how you're dealing with the isolation, what you would recommend for others. And so we've been, I think all of us at work have been struggling. How do we keep in contact with our coworkers? But it wasn't with this extra dimension that you were talking about today. So if you let us know how you're coping with that, what your ideas are, what do's or don'ts, and then we can kind of wrap up at the end.
Go ahead, somebody. I have my wife here, and I've actually been going to work the entire time, so I haven't had to work out of home. So I haven't been isolated, except when my wife is at work during the day, because I work a morning shift. So mine's a little different. These folks might have a little different view.
For me, it's helped that I've been able to go in the office for some shifts, but I moved to the Seattle office at the end of 2019, so I was going through the shock of getting used to a new place because this is furthest north I've lived. I'm also on the record as saying that I would never live in the Northwest, so that turned out to be a lie. So yes, I was getting used to just a whole different life and trying to get settled down, and then the pandemic started. And I'm from Louisiana, so I'm very far removed from family. And while I knew like one or two people when I moved here, I didn't really know very much else. So I was very much isolated and without my support system and whatnot. So that made it really difficult. So just having something as simple as being able to go into the office and kind of something to break up that monotony, and just trying to find new hobbies and those things like that really kind of helped me out, because it was, I'm in a much better place this winter, but it was very difficult for the first couple of months of the pandemic, just kind of being in that situation and being caught off guard with the circumstances.
So how about you, Ariana? You're at school. Are you going into class or are they all online? How are you doing with this?
So my situation's unique. So Harvard's in Massachusetts, right? I'm in Oklahoma with my partner. He is a graduate student at OU, so I'm not even like anywhere near where everybody else is, and my entire cohort is in Cambridge. So yeah, I'm pretty cut off from Harvard as a whole. I There's been pros and cons to it. I've learned that I'm actually an introvert, so I've been enjoying a lot of this time self-reflecting, but it has been really difficult. Um, I've kind of had to step out of my comfort zone and seek relationships, whether it be virtually, like via Slack or social media. Um, and things like that. And, Zoom fatigue is very real. And so I've kind of had to find a balance. And I also struggle with productivity whenever I'm not physically like in the office, for example. And so I've just had to tell myself, like, we're working and doing school or stuff. We're all doing life in the middle of a pandemic that's been going on for over a year, with a whole bunch of other things going on in our personal lives, and things going on in this country. And so I've just had to learn to be kind to myself. And I hope y'all can be kind to yourselves too, because like we're living in some really trying times. And I've had to tell myself, like, baby steps are okay. If I am working in my pajamas all day, or like working for only an hour a day, like it's a step forward, and like little steps forward are okay. Like, don't be upset with yourself and don't compare yourself to other people, because we all have our own stories. We're all going through our own things, and like I just want people to know that like it's okay to just take things one day or one step at a time. And so it's not perfect. I still struggle, but that's been my mindset, and it's been immensely helpful.
Okay. So Crystal, you get the last word, and the fact that you gave it as a segue, and your current day job deals with COVID-19. So how is this affecting you, and how are you dealing with it?
Yeah, so my position with AmeriCorps is 100% remote. So not only am I getting fatigue from working from home and Zoom calls, but I have COVID-19 fatigue because it's all that my job deals with, right? Um, and I'm going to be honest with you, it's really hard. It is hard to be at home for work and just for regular life. It's hard to only be able to communicate with my coworkers through chat or video calls. I seek that connection, and that is hard to have virtually. But we have regular video call check-ins, which, even though it's virtual, does help, where we can vent about, a tough day at work that we had, or we've been doing these like team building activities that have been great. So we had a pet show and tell on Tuesday where everybody talked about their cats and dogs, and that was great. And before that, we had everybody brought a recipe that they love. And so things like that might seem really simple, but like right now, it's more important than ever. And I'm also really grateful to have a couple of friends nearby who have been part of our like quarantine bubble since this all went down. And we try to see them frequently. And it's nice to see people in person. If there's any way that you can safely do that, even if you're just wearing a mask and staying outside, like some sort of human interaction in person is really helpful to break up the monotony of being at home all the time. And I really need that. And for me as well, I work in the same spot every day, and that is monotonous, but also I have a dedicated space for my work where I say, this is where I work. Everywhere else is just me being at home. And so that I can provide a little bit of mental separation there. And that goes a long way too. But I think any moment that you can get out of your home just to like sit outside for a minute, see other people, if you can do so safely, I highly recommend that. It helps a lot.
Okay. Well, we're over time, but I don't think anybody who's joined us regrets that one bit. I mean, this has been an incredibly engaging session. I want to thank all 4 of you one more time, not only for your time, but for your courage and sharing what are really are private details, to not just for yourselves, but more for the real reason you want to help others, let them know that they're not alone, and to help those of your coworkers understand what they can or can't do, should or should not do to help, and to be more empathetic and accepting. So I really thank you once again. This has been a fantastic Q&A at the end, and sharing your stories was just really inspiring. So I feel like I've got 4 new friends here that I would want to definitely stay in touch with you. And it's to Crystal's point at the end, even introverts need a hug, right? You want to see your friends, and you want to see your colleagues, and I hope to see you all in Houston in 2022 for the annual meeting, if not before, and hopefully virtually between now and then. So I want to thank all of you out there who joined us today. Thank you for joining us. Please tell your friends and colleagues, if you enjoyed this, to direct them back to the web link that will be posted later on the AMS webpage, so you'll be able to go back and watch this again, or ask your colleagues to watch it. So on behalf of the AMS, thank all 4 of you again, and thank you all for joining us. And so that concludes the days, and take care for everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, everyone.